was in London recently. So while I was there, I took advantage of the opportunity to invite an old friend of mine, Alex Trenoweth, to visit me on the barge that I was living on briefly and discuss with me her fascinating book and her fascinating life as a school teacher and astrologer. Alex has written about how astrology can be useful to both parents and teachers and even students themselves. And we had a fascinating conversation. So I am here with Alex Trenoweth in London, and we're on a boat of all places. And it's great to be here on our secret Thames location to have this conversation. I've been dying to talk to you about the whole year that I've been wanting to show people what astrology is really capable of and why it's such an important part of our culture and part of our way of understanding ourselves. And I've been thinking about you a lot the whole year, and that's why I'm so excited I got this chance to be in London to talk to you, because I know that you're also a teacher and educator.
Yep.
And, so astrology is something that, for astrologers, it's there from birth. We look at people's date of birth from the moment that they're born. And so it seems obvious that surely it's got a lot to say about children and childhood, because it's there from the very beginning. So who better to talk about that than a teacher? And I know you've written about it. You've written a great book called Growing Pains, about the astrology to do with children and teaching.
Yep.
So start off telling us a little bit more about that. Firstly, are you a practicing school teacher?
I am a practicing school teacher, and I teach in a normal school with 30 children.
Mm-hmm.
Now recently, because I've been traveling a lot, I've tapered off and taken on different responsibilities. But for a long time, I was that teacher in charge of 30 students, with another 30 students every hour, so up to 150 students I would see per day. 440 students I'd see over a 2-week period,
Wow.
plus those I was in charge of during breaks and lunchtime. So yes, I am a typical comprehensive school teacher.
So so you're teaching elementary, primary school grades?
I teach secondary school, so
Okay.
ages 11 to 16, with a little bit of 17 and 18-year-olds, but my favorite year group is the 11-year-olds to the 13-year-olds.
So I'll call it, that's your day job, or your primary day job. Are you a practicing astrologer as well?
Yes, I see clients. Most of my clients are parents with children, or I see teachers and I help them, give them some advice about how they can teach the children that they're struggling with. But as we will talk about it, I do it in general terms. I'm not looking at each individualized birth chart for every single pupil in a school.
Right.
I'm not paid enough to do that.
But I mean, the first thing that comes to mind about that is there a legal issue about that? I know, for example, many doctors study astrology as well, even though some doctors or other scientists might think it's the opposite of what they want to do. Many of them understand how helpful it is because you're dealing with human beings. But I know that in terms of professional codes and all of that, they could never own up to it or even allow it into their practice of medicine. Don't teachers face the same issues?
Yes, in particularly because I worked in a school with a Christian ethos.
Mm-hmm.
So my given name is not Alex. I have a legal name, which I loathe and despise. But, it's a legal name. And so when I started the school, I asked them, could you call me Alex? And they Googled me. And then I was formally summoned to the head teacher's office. And I was told in no uncertain terms that I was to be called by my legal name. If parents caught wind of my astrology practice, I could be dismissed for grounds of bringing the school into disrepute. So I was under heavy pressure to be quiet about being an astrologer. But I became an astrologer well before I became a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And, I am in my heart of hearts an astrologer. And teaching is something that came out of astrology.
Because of your concern about kids and kind of bringing them up in a way that's best for them.
Yes, and not only that, it's about seeing the misery of the struggle of parenthood and the struggle of teaching. And so I always tell teachers that come to me for advice, it really isn't about the kids. It's about understanding you and your Saturn. And same thing with parents. The first step is understanding how your Saturn is. You need to get a grip with what your Saturn means, because if you don't understand your Saturn, your children will.
So you mean Saturn is about your lessons in life? And
it's about how you discipline yourself, how you discipline other people, your weaknesses, your sorrows, your sadnesses, where you feel pain, where you're likely to lash out because you're hurt. So if you can understand that, it makes you pretty impervious, you know.
What immediately I'm fascinated by, and I actually feel a little bit of instant excitement about. So you, obviously teaching and children, discipline issues are always a subject on the table. And so you're focusing on the parents' discipline issues as your starting point, their way of discipline.
Yes, parents must get to grips with themselves first before they have their own children. They must understand their own inner disciplinarian, their own inner guardian before they can become good guardians themselves. And of course the way the world is that at the moment is we don't encourage parents to do that, let alone use astrology to do that.
Absolutely.
It's about getting the child to conform to what the parents want or what society wants.
That's a brilliant insight to me, and it really for me shows how vital astrology is. And even it shows that it's not even a matter of whether the school is worried about what you being an astrologer in front of children or whatever it is that concerns them. That even by focusing on the adults, the parents, you can really achieve so much in changing that child's experience because of issues of discipline and where is it really coming from in those cycles. So
and standing firm.
Right.
You know, standing firm. And I love the word impervious because kids will throw out stuff at you that they're trying to hurt you, trying to redirect your energies away from what they've done wrong. But if you can stand firm and you can focus on actually, this is what you've done wrong. This is how you can correct it without you losing the plot because they've hurt you. You know, you're standing firm and you're not distracted by what the child is doing or saying to get at you.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I can see how helpful that would be to parents. But what about the child's chart? Are you also then looking at the child and seeing perhaps their Saturn or how they respond to discipline, or what is it that you really focus on with the child?
I cannot possibly look at the birth chart of every single child, nor is it my business.
Right.
But I remember one day because teaching is such a brutal profession, you get beaten down emotionally, But I understood my Saturn, or so I thought. But I was only becoming a teacher to pay for astrology courses. I wasn't really going to stick there too long. And I remember there was a moment when I looked out at my class and I thought to myself, if I never stood up here as a teacher again, if I never taught again, how sad I'd be. Because I really loved it. And shortly after that I realized that the students, that we teach them by year group, and then I realized, my goodness me, they all have the same Jupiter sign.
Oh, of course, because they were born in the same year.
Same year. Or if they were born when Jupiter changed signs, it'd be really easy to mark that in my book, in my mark book, make it unobtrusive so I can get away with it. And I also realized, which was the really big kicker, was they all had the same Saturn. So they were looking at me all the same way.
Oh, wow.
Because they have their idea of an interdisciplinarian, and I represent that to them. So if I can understand how they perceive me, I could be careful but supportive and help them to come around to, accepting the way I discipline or the way that I work. And so I think it just has to do with an awareness of self and a little bit of awareness of them without getting too personal. I cannot legally look at a birth chart without permission, and I would not do that. But I also feel I legally cannot watch a child go down the plug hole without feeling a moral obligation to use my years and training as an astrologer to do whatever intervention I can. So I'm afraid that on some occasions I will see a child and I will look at the noon chart because I have all that birth data. If I think I can get away with it, I'll talk to the parent, this is what I do. Can I help you? Can you let me try? And sometimes when I look at a chart, and I just think, okay, maybe the best thing for you is a new start somewhere else. Or maybe this is the intervention and professionals we can pull in. But it's always working with the child and always taking into consideration what they want and talking to them. So the chart is running in the background, but I'm talking to the child as a sort of a gateway to a different start or a new perspective on education and schooling and ultimately themselves. Because I'm looking at their Saturn is what I'm looking at.
That's great. Have you ever got a bad reaction from a parent suggesting that?
No, I haven't. I'm very careful.
Yeah.
And I've taken some risks. There are a couple parents I approached, and I thought they're going to want to use that to get rid of me, but they didn't. Once they listened to me, and they realized that what I'm saying comes from a bit of experience and a bit of bravado on my part. they want to hear a little bit more.
Okay.
Because ultimately we're talking about their child.
Yeah.
And if we tried X, Y, Z and all the way through the alphabet, what's wrong with a little bit of astrology, something they haven't tried?
That's good to know. But I know, I mean, your first book, Growing Pains, I know there's a book on the way, and I want to talk about that a little bit as well. But your first book, Growing Pains, is not just about then that the incarnation of discipline and those kind of things, but it's actually about the growth cycles themselves. And teachers and parents see kids through various stages of their lives. So what can you share with us and perhaps educate us a little bit about the growing cycle of a child that can be important to know and helpful?
Well, I always ask parents to start with their own Saturn, as I said, but the child's Jupiter is where a child's going to grow, and where they're going to grow differently to the way the parents have grown themselves. And it's also where the parents, when a child starts expanding and growing and taking risks and doing things the parent hasn't done, the parent themselves always gets a little bit nervous because they're experiencing something completely new. Their Saturn is activated. So, so if the parent is grounded and impervious, they can have the faith that the child is going to be okay. The critical ages in the growth cycle of a child are the Jupiter squares. So at 3, 6, 9, and 12, multiples of 3. Right. Because, especially the Jupiter return, which is when Jupiter goes all the way around the zodiac and goes back to its starting point, is about
12 years old.
Just before the 12th birthday. But that, to me, is an important stage of development because it also coincides. I hate that word, but
because it ain't a coincidence.
Yes, when the brain starts to develop very, very quickly. We know so much more about the adolescent brain than we did 20 years ago, because it used to be thought that only infants, experience this rapid brain growth because they're learning how to walk and talk and socialize. But we now know they get a second chance. So if a child's been neglected or abused or maltreated in some way, the brain does learn how to cope with that, to deal with that situation. But at the Jupiter return, it starts opening up again. And even a child who's been severely mistreated can actually catch up developmentally if we understand how to capitalize. And my opinion as an astrologer is that we capitalize on that by understanding that child's Jupiter cycle.
So then you can, as it were, intervene at those critical times.
Give them the extra push they need, get their confidence running, get them feeling like they can conquer the world, which is what you want with Jupiter cycles.
Exactly.
You want them to have faith that they're going to land on their feet. Because it's not going to last forever, that rapid growth. It does get tapered off a few years later with the Saturn opposition, which is exactly what Saturn's for. Jupiter is all about taking these crazy risks. Saturn's about bringing it all in, paring it down, using all that knowledge that was acquired during that stage of rapid development and focusing it.
I think one of the things I'm taking away from that is that while psychologically and physiologically we understand that all people have approximately the same type of growth cycle. Adolescence is going to come on somewhere shortly around that time, and so on. But that the astrology reveals that each person does it their unique way. And that very importantly, I mean, such a key point that you said that I want to repeat is that it's not the same way that the parents did it.
Right.
Because, everyone wants what's best for their children. But often it's really what would have been best for themselves that they think is what's going to be good for the kids.
Or they want to play it safe.
Yeah.
It's a parent's instinct to keep their child safe. And, I don't want my child to repeat the same mistakes I made, is what parents often say. But they don't acknowledge that those mistakes have made them the person that they are.
Yeah.
And that they've learned and they've grown and they developed and they wriggled their own personalities to deal with those mistakes, and that's why they're the wonderful people that they are.
So then I'm going to ask you a question that I know a lot of people must be thinking about. What happens if you look at the parent's chart and potentially the child's chart, if they've given you permission or required you to do that, and you see something really challenging, or worst case scenario, you see that the parent is the disciplinarian that's actually causing their child to become less in some way? Well,
this is where the skill of an astrologer comes in. We have to deal with difficult things all the time. People don't come to an astrologer if their life is going really well and everything's all wonderful and lovely and everybody's happy. They come to us because they got a problem. And the skill of an astrologer is that we can look at this and we can help them see the way out. We can't make the decisions for them, but we can help them see their options. And this is what I do with parents. Okay, if you go down this route, this will be one possible outcome, but here's something else you might want to consider. And at the end of the day, the parent, I'm not responsible for the child. The parent's responsible for the child. There's another boundary that I have to be very careful of.
Right.
I can't take on someone else's pain and agony.
Well, so then happening at the individual level of the parents and the children and so on, is there room to then take that into the system in some way? I know we face legal issues, or let's call them cultural issues. There isn't a good reason why there would be legal issues.
Yeah.
But there are certainly cultural. People have beliefs about astrology. People have ring fences around certain ideas and sometimes around religious beliefs. A lot of people think for some reason that astrology competes or disagrees with religion. And it's really got nothing to do with it. But maybe perhaps in your ideal world or your imagined future, is there a place that the kind of knowledge that you're giving us, the kind of understanding that you have, can be actually taken into the system?
I just think it'd be wonderful if, as you mentioned, parents understood their sore points, their ways that they could be, successful. But wouldn't it be great if every child understood that too? Things that they could work on. It'd be like having a little workbook for your whole entire life of, times you might expect to be challenged and times where those challenges force you to make a decision that'll be your crossroads in your life. And by the way, for Saturn, it's 7 years, so 7, 14, 21, 28.
Right.
And multiples of 7.
Which are recognizably those critical years. Is a child ready to learn about themselves from the child? Are they able to learn about themselves psychologically or discipline issues, or are they able to take that on board?
Well, again, I don't think not the way, because the brain isn't fully formed. So no, I don't think so. There are ways of engaging them without overloading them, which is what Growing Pains was about in the Jupiter section, about how a teacher can use those growth cycles to appeal to them. Because at that age, really, you just want them exploring. It doesn't matter, because I'd be doing them wrong if I only taught them astrology or forced it down their necks. All my job as a teacher is to open up the opportunities for them. And it doesn't matter what my interests are. Who cares about my interests? It's their interests that are important. If a child comes to me and says, I'm interested in auto mechanics, which I have no interest in, who am I to say, sorry, you need to study art? It's craziness. I need to point them in the right direction. I need to know where the resources are, who's who.
So they can say what the interests are, but then you can help them develop in a way that suits them. I'll show them through,
because it's like a smorgasbord. You want them to taste everything at the Jupiter return.
Yeah. So who is Growing Pains directed at? Is it at the teachers, the parents,
I aimed it a little bit at everybody. I think anybody who reads it can take away a little bit of something. But I wrote it from a teacher's perspective.
Teachers must get an enormous amount out of this book. It sounds like, to me, in my ideal world, the compulsory handbook for teachers.
Well, it just makes me laugh because, teachers will try absolutely anything. Myers-Briggs, they'll try this psychometric test, they'll try that one. But when it comes to trying astrology, it's a medieval superstition, But I do get good feedback from teachers, but teachers who generally have an interest in astrology. So I'm going to have to rethink about how I can engage the average school teacher.
Well, I know that you've written another book, so tell me about that. Who's that directed? Does that address them?
This one has a far more somber reason, and I'll tell you quickly what it was, because it'll make sense. I was walking home from work one day, and it was getting late in the evening, and I saw there were loads of police cars, and because I live near the school, my first thought was, it's got to be one of my kids. Maybe there's been an accident or there's been a problem. So I saw the police, and I saw a body on the street covered. And of course, I'm really upset now because I'm thinking that's one of my students. So I asked the police, I'm a teacher for the school, here's my ID. Is there something to do with my school? And they said yes, but they couldn't give me any details. So I went home thinking, oh my gosh, that's my student under that sheet. So I did what every modern teacher and parent does, is I went on social media to see if I could figure out what happened. And it didn't take me long to figure out that the body under the sheet wasn't my student, it was a victim of one of my students. One of my students, ex-students, he was a little bit older than, he'd graduated a few years before, had bullied and chased a boy under a bus. And the boy died. And it was the worst feeling in the world to think, why, we knew this boy was troubled. We could never put a finger on exactly what the problem was because we couldn't use astrology and there was nothing really we could do. We just knew something was wrong. And, he was pushed to primary school, very little information to go on. And I remember the next day in staff briefing, the head teacher told us that there had been some problems, and if the case came up, we were not to talk to the children about it, we were to refer them to the school counselor. Well, I looked down this long row of teachers at our only school counselor, and from what I saw on social media, I just thought to myself, how is this one counselor going to deal with 1,000 plus students, plus the teachers that will inevitably find out what has happened, and how poorly resourced the school is. So I reckon there was a need to talk more about how we can help people deal with their Saturn cycles. So I wanted to focus on Saturn, and it was a challenge for me. In fact, I wrote the book, most of it in South Africa. But I wanted to look at the Saturn squares, the oppositions, and the waning squares at 21, and the returns, and then the repeat cycle. And I wanted to use case studies of somebody who was highly successful and use their Saturn well for each sign. And then I wanted to use a case study of what most people would perceive as being the most deplorable types of people, serial killers. And I wanted to show how they use their Saturn badly, or how if they'd had the proper support at the crucial ages, they would have made different decisions that would not have led down that terrible road of murder and suffering for not just the victim, but the victim's families, for the perpetrators' families.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to tackle that one. Are serial killers born, or are they made?
That's a fascinating question. That could be another whole conversation we could have. We know that astrology has suffered so much misrepresentation and so on over centuries, really. And some people might be thinking, well, if only astrology were really a science or something like that. And I think I've always thought, the thing is, if people measured astrology by its outcomes and not sit and worry about why does it work, then they'd see that it works. And so many other business people come to me and say the point is that it helps them time their decisions perfectly and they get fantastic results. They don't care why it works.
Yeah, it's kind of like using the lift
to
the 20th floor. You don't care about the mechanics of why it gets to the 20th floor.
Exactly.
You're just happy you don't have to climb up 20 flights of stairs every morning. I've been going on about it for the past 2 years, about how badly our educational system needs to be reformed. Here in England, it's based on the agricultural revolution. Where children had to get up at the same time every morning because they were expected to work in the fields, or get up early to work in the fields, or wherever, a factory. And it works against the natural circadian cycle, the natural sleeping cycle of adolescence, which changes because of all the brain development. So a child a teenager having to get up at 8 a.m., the brain is not awake. So how do they wake up the brain? They go buy chemicals. They go buy Red Bull and other things to wake their brain up, which messes up the chemistry of the brain.
Wow. So the whole system needs to change. Here am I asking you about how do we integrate astrology or that understanding into the system, but the system itself is due for an overhaul.
It needs it badly.
Badly. It doesn't suit the 21st century by any standards. Shouldn't we be just starting from scratch? The 21st century surely requires different things of children. And maybe that is the space where astrology and things like astrology can enter back into the conversation. About how do we actually understand the child. It's not the needs of the agricultural revolution anymore. We understand that we must focus our understanding around the needs of the child.
And I think that our current educational system is not going to be it's not viable. It'll change because, we're increasingly more technological.
Right.
And if you look at our children, they know more about the internet than we do. They know how to get around any sort of filter we put in. They know how to program our mobile phones. They know how to do this, that shortcut, and that shortcut. The kids are going to be teaching us how to use technology. And I don't think, teachers like me will be around, but we'll have different uses.
Yeah.
And a lot more stuff will be done on the technological, on computers, maybe from home.
Yeah.
But there is a revolution in the air for education.
That's
it
amazing.
Has to be.
So when will your new book be out? Does it have a title?
Oh yes, it's called The Wolf You Feed. And the title comes from a very old Native American story where a grandfather tells his grandson, inside of me there are two wolves fighting all the time. One wolf is good and one wolf is bad. And the grandchild asks, but grandfather, which wolf wins? And the grandfather says, the wolf you feed. So it's about the wolf you feed using Saturn cycles, and the outcome, as I explained to you, is either going to be something really marvelous and full of success or something quite dire, or could be quite dire, and full of unhappiness and misery.
All depends on the wolf you feed.
The wolf you feed.
You can email Alex on this email address and get a signed copy of her new book, or her old book too. And of course, you can join me back here next week on YouTube and on Cape Town TV. Don't forget to email me or visit my website if you've got a personal question or ideas for the show. See you here.